In the 1470s, a series of outrageous blood libels were leveled against Jewish communities in the Germanic lands, including one in Regensburg. To secure their acquittal, the Jews of Regensburg needed an enormous sum of money, far beyond their means. The rabbis gathered in Nuremberg to strategize, and ultimately they turned to Rabbi Yosef Colon, Maharik, in Pavia, with a pressing question. Could they obligate all Jewish communities in the Holy Roman Empire to contribute to help the Jews in Regensburg? Maharik's response is a masterful work of Talmudic analysis, but also a sobering reflection on the historical realities of the time. Maharik, Moirenu, Rabbi Yosef Colon. He lived in the 1400s. In the time of the tshuva that we're going to read today, we can date it to between the years 1478 and 1480, and how we're able to date it to those years will become apparent later. At this time, the Maharik is living in Pavia, which is in Italy, not too far from Milan. Let's read from Shoirish Dalid, and where he writes as follows. This is from the middle of the tshuva. V'yan ki Nuremberg, because in the German city of Nuremberg, uvachama ayores acheros ba'Ashkenaz, and other cities, other German cities, she'enam rashoim lichtov b'derech gzeira, it is forbidden for the rabbis there to give a psak din in a way of gzeira, meaning they cannot enforce what they're saying with some sort of cherem or excommunication. The German rabbis don't have the ability to do that. We know throughout history there were times that secular authorities would say, Jews, you do have like this a greater degree of autonomy, so you could police yourselves a little more, so you do have the ability to strip a citizen of his rights, and which is what an excommunication means. And sometimes they wouldn't allow that. And so at this time, in the late 1400s in Germany, they don't have the ability to do this. They're afraid of the rulers that live there, who don't allow them to do this. I think that means, and if they do, there's going to be negative consequences for that. So they can't do it. So they can't do it, I'm going to do it, because I don't live in Ashkenaz, I live in Italy. So Anochi Hatzoyer, the young one, Maharik, is toward the end of his life during these years. I believe he passed away either in 1480 or a few years thereafter. So I am stepping up, and I'm being goizer b'gzeira chamura, making a very strict decree, b'koyach nidoi v'shamta, with the powers of excommunication. I'll call Yoshei Eretz Ashkenaz, for any Jew living in the areas that we call generally the Germanic lands, that you are not allowed to disobey what the rabbis in Nuremberg who are convening in Nuremberg. So right now, at the time that Maharik is writing this tshuva, there is some sort of assembly, there's some rabbinic meeting that is going on in Nuremberg. And the rabbis there are going to make a decision, and the decision has to do with money. And whatever they say, however much they say a particular community needs to pay, everyone needs to pay. Where is this money going to? Lifroya, to pay for, or lisayeh ba'itza, or to at least help out in the expense. Alilozu, this libel. Which libel? Asher ha'elilu alacheinu kihila kedosha shebe Regensburg. The libel that they have libeled against the Jewish community in Regensburg, b'sheker, uv'chazov, uv'tarmis, 3 ways of saying a lie, another lie, and another lie. So the community in Regensburg has been libeled. There is a financial cost in terms of saving them. The rabbis are gathered in Nuremberg, and they're going to put numbers on each community, how much everyone needs to pay. I'm afraid people aren't going to listen. The rabbis there can't enforce it with the ban. I'm going to enforce it with the ban from where I'm writing here in Italy. Any person who intentionally is not going to listen, who's not going to listen to what the Chachamim are going to decide in Nuremberg. Yibadel Mikal Agoyle is going to be separated from the Jewish people. V'rafsa by ha'ala, and he goes and starts quoting passages of curses that's going to land on this person. Remember, there's two sides to Acherim. One side is spiritual, the fact that there is going to be an element of a curse. The other side is sociological in terms of the community. So he's stressing the curses, v'hashemei ali, and to end off on a positive note, if you listen to what I'm saying, yishkoin betach, you will dwell comfortably, safely, v'tvayeu bracha, you're going to have bracha, na'um hatzayer, I have spoken, Yosef Colon. So this is the conclusion of the tshuva of the Ma'arik, and obviously what we want to understand right now is what is going on in Regensburg. Why is there this convention? What is the story? So for that, let's turn to this other handout that has the timeline. And you're looking at page 1. So all of the information that we're going to be discussing right now comes from a book that's titled The Myth of Ritual Murder, Jewish Magic in Reformation Germany. It's a book that came out in 1990 by Rani. His name is Po Chia Sia. Anyway, so all of the information that we're going to give here comes from this book. Hamaisa Shahaya Kachaya, here is the story. It's on the sheet in bullet points, but I'll elaborate a little. In the spring of the year 1475, in the German city of Trent, today Trent is in Italy and it's called Trento, but then it was part of the Holy Roman Empire, and it was a German city, and hence the German name Trent. So in this city, a 2-year-old Christian boy by the name of Simon is discovered murdered. There are very few Jews who live in this town. However, the father of Simon accuses them for his murder, and the Jews are arrested. They are tortured to confess, and eventually a number of them do, and eventually most, if not all, of the Jews, again, it's just a handful, a little more than a dozen, were killed. Okay, this was a very famous blood libel. There have been many throughout history, some more famous, some less so. This is one of the more famous ones. Early in the year 1476, the Bishop of Regensburg, by the name of Heinrich, went to Rome, and on the way back, he returns through Trent. And when he's in Trent, he finds an interesting piece of information. One of the Jews who was tortured to confess to the murder of Simon went by the name of Wolfgang. This Wolfgang, once they were torturing him, he was giving them information. One of the things he said was that, oh yeah, a few years ago, in 1467, I was involved in a plot in Regensburg, together with more than 20 different Jews, and he rattled off a whole bunch of names, and there was a ritual murder over there. So this is what the bishop finds when he's passing through Trent. So he says, oh, give me that affidavit, give me that document, that's important for me. And he takes that document back with him to Regensburg. One thing leads to the next. On March 29th, in the year 1476, 6 Jews from Regensburg are arrested, including their rabbi, who's known in the documents as Yussel. The wives and children of these 6 Jews, they are under a house arrest. At the same time, a list of their property is drawn up, because the idea is going to be that their property is going to be confiscated by the city. All Jews may not leave Regensburg during this time, and all Jewish assets of Regensburg are frozen. March 30, the next day, the confession of Wolfgang in Trent is read to Rabbi Yosef. So now he knows what they want him to confess to, and he is then tortured, and ultimately he confesses to whatever they wanted him to confess to. Later, when the torture stopped, he retracted his confession, but nonetheless, he did confess. April 9, a few days later, 11 more Jews are arrested. Eventually, a total of 6 confess after the torture, and one mentions the purpose, the motive of this supposed blood libel that occurred in, this supposed murder that occurred in 1467 was to use it for the ritual preparation of matzah. The confessions all conflict with each other. One of them says it happened 8 years ago. One of them says it happened 14 years ago. One of them says the murder happened in December time. Another one says it happened Pesach time. Another one says it happens in the rabbi's house. Another one says it happened at the shul. That's natural when you're going to torture someone to confess, we expect these types of conflicts to surface. All of this is being perpetrated by who? The city officials. Regensburg is a free city, which means there's no like baron or there's no lord that is in charge of the city. The only person who's oimed al gabeim, the only person who has rank over them is the Holy Roman Emperor himself, as opposed to vast areas of lands there were secular lords and princes who had jurisdiction. So the emperor hears about this, and the emperor at the time, his name is Frederick III, and he's not too thrilled with the blood libel, especially because the Jews came and handed him a shtickle kesef for him to do something about it. And so on April 15th, he orders the Jews released. Now we would assume the emperor says you got to release the Jews, so naturally they're going to be released right away. That's not what happened. Ultimately, this turned into a very long affair because the Holy Roman Empire, the way it worked, was the emperor obviously had the rights of an emperor, but cities officially had certain rights. And princes over their jurisdictions also had rights. And bishops over their areas also had rights. There were any area, if someone lived in the Holy Roman Empire, they lived under one of three rulers, beside for the emperor himself. Either you lived under, which was most people, they lived under a lord, a secular lord, or a lord, a prince, whatever you want to call him, or you lived under a bishop, that's like, who's answerable to the church, or you lived in a free city. You had some of these free cities. Regensburg is one of these free cities. So there was always tension throughout the history of the Holy Roman Empire. There was always tension. What rights did the empire have? What rights did the bishops have? What rights did the princes have? What rights did these free cities have? Here the free city says, what are you talking about? A murder happened in our city? We have a right to adjudicate, to let the trial run its course. The emperor can't just intervene and say you have to let them go. And this turned into a protracted debate between the Emperor Frederick and this city. Anyway, so they continued their investigation. So far all they have is the confessions that were a result of torture. So they knew that that's not enough. You need to have some material evidence. Remember, there's no missing person. There's no one, right? There is no story that we have of someone that's actually missing, no body. Well, they said there's something we could do about that. On April 22nd, they start excavations at the house of Rabbi Yosef. And after 3 days, bones are found somewhere in the cellar. Now, the Jews in their legal brief to Frederick, they point out that this excavation was not supervised by disinterested parties, meaning it was the people who were doing the torturing who were also doing the excavating, and it was widely believed and said at the time that the bones were planted there. In fact, there was testimony that day there were people digging up a grave in the Christian cemetery. Okay, but anyway, they're building their case. They have the confession. They have these bones. But remember, the emperor says, you gotta cut this out. Well, they didn't cut it out. So in early September of 1476, Emperor Frederick says, okay, we're going to start removing rights from the city. So one of the rights he removes is one of the things, a city has the right to issue capital punishment. He says, you guys don't have the right anymore to issue capital punishment. And this was like a step. If you continue not listening, if you continue to be disobedient, we're going to take away other rights from you. But this went on for a very, very long time, many, many months, where the city tried figuring out if there's a way, and they tried sending ambassadors and shluchim to the emperor to see if they could work something out. Finally, in May of 1478, so that's 2 years after this story, they were arrested in March of 1476. So it's more than 2 years into the story, the city finally conceded, and they say the Jews are going to be released if they agree to specific terms. What are the terms? So the terms are as follows. The Jews who are arrested need to turn over 22,000 florins. That is an astronomical amount of money, golden coins. 10,000 need to go to Frederick, by the way. Frederick says you need to give to me because I secured the release. So 10,000 need to go to me. This is part of the agreement. 5,000, the Jews need to give the city of Regensburg because room and board. Room and board, we jailed you, so you need to pay for that, and also the legal fees. 8,000, Frederick fined the city. Regensburg had to pay 8,000 for their disobedience. So the city says, we don't have that money. So the Jews, we're just going to pass it on to the Jews. So this is a huge amount of money. And what happens is that they're languishing in prison because how are they going to come up with that money? The 17 or so Jews who were arrested, there's no way they're coming up with that money. Even the entirety of the Jewish community in Regensburg, there's no way that they're coming up with that type of money. And that's what led to this convention that happened in Nuremberg. So now we know how to date it. It was after the agreement, May 1478. And we know that in September of 1480, they finally went free, which means the payment plan was finalized and the 17 Jews were released. So presumably it was during that period where the rabbis in Nuremberg get together and they say, we have to do something to raise money for them. Because remember, it's not only 17 Jews in prison, their families are on house arrest. All of the Jews' assets in Regensburg are frozen and Jews can't even leave. Besides maybe for specific reasons if they had permission. But overall, this is severe limitations on the Jewish community. So Nuremberg is not too far. It's about 100 kilometers away from Regensburg. They got together and they wanted to say, basically, we're going to tax all of the Jewish communities, or many of the Jewish communities living in the Holy Roman Empire, that's going to pay for this. However, remember, they don't have teeth, because they don't have the ability to say, and if you don't pay, there's going to be a cherem. And so they send a letter to Maharik, a very well-known Rav at this time. Again, it's the last few years of Maharik's life. He's in Italy, and he is going to come and support them. As it becomes very clear from this, he's going to support this. Now, before we understand the backing for Maharik's support for their proposal, I want to first discuss what was the normal way of actually thinking about this, because I want you to see the chiddush in the Maharik's approach. So first, let's talk about the normal way. When I say the normal way, it means as follows. Throughout Jewish history, it was very common where a group of Jews would be extorted immorally by a ruler or a certain person who says, you need to give a certain amount of money. And very often the question was, one second, so who pays for that? Me? Or is that something like, I pass it on, maybe the whole community needs to pay. So let's read how that issue was dealt with, and when we see 2 or 3 stories of that, you'll then understand the chiddush of the Maharik's approach for this matter. So for this, we're actually going to fast forward, and we're going to move into the 17th century to the Shalos HaTshuvos of Rabbi Yitzchak al-Gazi. Rabbi Yitzchak al-Gazi was a Rav in Izmir, and he lived in the 1600s. And he starts Siman Samach Tes with the following story. Maisa Shahoya Kachaya, here is the story. Once upon a time, Shenimsa Naira Toy Garma Achas Mushleches Bebar Toygar Echad. There was a young Turkish, non-Jew, a Turkish girl who was found in a cistern or a pit belonging to a Turk. V'kamu agoyim al ha-Yehudim. The Gentiles accused the Jews. Many of the writers in the 1500s, 1600s, especially in Ottoman lands, instead of saying Yehudim, they say Yehudim with an aleph. I'm not entirely sure why this is. Apparently, it has to do with avoiding, I think, the Yud Hey, and this was just like an extra chomer. There may be another explanation, but this goes on for a while, but it's all 15, 16, 1700s, and specifically like Turkish Rabbanim who are using this phrase, Ottoman Empire. Anyway, so the non-Jews accused the Jews, and they libeled them. The Jews did this, and they planted her corpse in this Turk's backyard. All of the Jews in this undisclosed location were arrested. Because the Gentiles said, they said this was a conspiracy. Everyone agreed to do this. And they were all booked. They took their names down. Okay. And because we bribed the wicked people, it benefited the Jews. They weren't incarcerated. They actually went out, and the bail here was that they were all responsible for each other. Until eventually there will be a trial which would hopefully acquit them. Okay. So, however, on the second day, so some military personality came. He uses a lashon of pasuk, ba gambuz. It's a lashon of a pasuk in Mishlei. The hateful, the odious came. this military individual. He re-incarcerated the Jewish people. And many of them were tortured. And many had to pay off big money to save themselves from this libel. So it seems like trial canceled, bail canceled. Now it just like became a military thing, and it's much worse now, and they need to pay their way out of the problem. So now Rabbi Al-Ghazi tell us, the question comes to him, what about, and I'll read the rest, I'll summarize outside, what about the people who live in town, but they were out of town. And so when the arrest happened, they weren't arrested. And when the names were taken down, they weren't taken down. And they weren't accused of anything. Do they need to participate in this huge amount of money that now will turn it into a community tax, basically? Because look, it's anti-Semitism, it's a hate crime, it's against the Jews, I just happened to be here. You were out of town that day on business, so you should also pay. Or do you say, no, it doesn't work that way. Compare it more to your house was flooded, so you need to pay. You want to talk to me tzedakah, we'll talk tzedakah, but tzedakah is one mesechta. Obligation is another mesechta. So the people who were arrested, they said, communal tax, everyone needs to pay. For obvious reasons. The people who were out of town, they said they shouldn't have to pay. And so this was the question that Rabbi Yitzchak Al-Ghazi was asked. Tshuva, what's his answer? So he brings from Aram Rottenburg, cited in the Mordechai in Perak HaGoizel Basra. What does the Mordechai say? Dafka lemisim heim shutfin. A community is considered partners for taxes. So that is, in order for us to live in a certain place, we need to pay taxes. Okay, so that's a burden all of us share together. But when it comes to libels, which unfortunately happens from time to time, I'm not sure how he's using that word, so I'm going to ignore that word. This, in fact, we are not all partners. So in other words, whoever is libeled, it's his headache. That's it. We're not all partners. If he chose you, it's you. If the ruler libeled the whole community, fine, then it's on the whole community. But if he libeled two people, it's on those two people. The lashon is v'im hasar malil al miktas hakol shaloi kadin. If the prince libels part of the community and it's immoral and it's wrong and it's a libel and it's false, there is no obligation for the other people. It's exactly like a flood. A flood hit your house, fine, so you need to deal with it. It doesn't become a moral obligation for the neighbor to do it. It's not a choiv. Again, stuck as a separate discussion, but it's not a choiv. This is, so Rabbi Yisrael Ghazi gives this answer for his case. He says the people who weren't there, when they showed up in town the next day, the non-Jews didn't make any accusations, didn't say they were part of the plot, they weren't arrested. No one had any tightness to them. So because no one had any tightness to them, so they're not part of the libel, he rules they do not need to pay. In fact, along the way, he brings an earlier tshuva from the Alshich, Rabbi Moshe Alshich, who lived in the 1500s in Tzfas. Let's see the story here. Ma'aseh shahoya kachoya. Here's the story. Starts the same way. Ma'aseh shahoya kachoya. Here's the story. Siman Kuf Zayin. Yehudim Mishnei Kilos. Again, it's undisclosed where exactly this happened. There were Jews from two different communities. We know that in the Ottoman Empire, especially in the 1500s, you had many exile communities because Jews from Spain and Portugal were forced to leave in the late 1400s. From Provence, they were forced to leave. From Navarre, they were forced to leave. From southern Italy, they were forced to leave. From France, they were forced to leave. So you had many diaspora communities in the Ottoman Empire during the 1500s. So you have over here Yehudim Mishnei Kihilos, two different Kihilos. Holchu Yachad Likbar Shnei Mesim. They went to do two simultaneous funerals. Let's say it was Ashkenazim and Sfardim, for example. One from each community. When they were in the cemetery, an incident happened. One of the non-Jewish leaders of this city was there, his child. And he went over to one of the Jews and said, "Give me money." It's not clear why he was asking for money. One thing led to the next. That of these two communities, the Jews that are leading these funeral processions, they started beating the son of this Tsar. Probably not the wisest idea. Maybe they didn't know who he was. And this was known now to the Subashi. Subashi is an Ottoman term. It meant at different times many different positions of honor or prestige within the Ottoman state. So it's not entirely clear what exactly the role is, but obviously some big macher. All right, so now he doesn't like the fact that the Tsar's children were beaten. He started arresting people. So when the members of these two communities saw that, they told, I think this means they told the Jew who started this whole thing, in the sense that they demanded money of him. And then it turned into a fight. They said, Lechis Pasher, go make up shara, go work this out, im ha subashi, with the subashi, pen, tirba hefsid, im yirban itzfasim. The more people get arrested, the more expensive this is going to be. And already some people are getting arrested. So why don't you go work it out and see if you could cut a deal. So he goes on to say, that's what he did. Now what happened was, although the two funerals, one was, let's say, Ashkenazim, and the other one was Sephardim, there was a third community, let's say Italians. There was a third community. There was no third funeral. A few Italians joined these two funeral processions. So what happened now? You know what happened now. The two communities, so what happened was, this Subashi said, you need to pay X amount. So the two killers are like, okay, we'll do half, you do half, and then case closed, right? They're like, no, why half? Let's divide it in three. There's a third kehillah here. And the third kehillah actually had a few of its Jews amongst these two funeral processions. So let's divide it in three and let them pay. So says this third community, that we weren't leading any funerals. Number one. Number two, none of our guys were involved in any of the fights. Number three, none of our guys were arrested. Number four, this Subashi is not even looking for us, didn't have any problem with us. He only arrested guys from your two teams. And so therefore, we should not be chayav to pay. We shouldn't have to pay anything. So the question turns to Reb Moshe Alshich, are they right? What does he say? He says absolutely. It's a very short shuvah. He says absolutely they're right. He says the norm is, whoever is part of the accusation, they need to deal with it. They need to deal with it. So the Ashkenazim are part of the accusation, they need to deal with it. Now within that, they decided that instead of the Ashkenazim, the few people who were caught, the whole community is going to take care of it. Okay, fine, that's their business. The Sephardim also, they decided instead of the few people who were caught in this mess, the whole community, fine, that's their prerogative if they wanted to turn it into a community. But to impose this on the third community, if they were not part of the Alila, they're not part of the Alila, end the story. So this is a fierce summary of, if you look up and down in the tshuva literature, of how shutz, meaning shalos tshuvas, this is generally speaking how this matter was treated. So let's bring it to our case. Regensburg has a blood libel. They say the Jews in Regensburg are obligated to pay 22,000 florins. So if you follow the normal rule is it's Regensburg's problem. Finish, end the story. We're in Nuremberg, we're in other cities. The alila is not on us. The accusation isn't on us. So finished, right? But now you already know what Marik is doing. Because from the very first text we read, it became very, very clear. He's like, you gotta listen to the rabbis in Nuremberg, right? Because the Marik is going to go in a different direction, which raises a question: what is his logic? So let's look at number 4. This is actually the opening words for the tshuva, and the opening words of his tshuva tell you what his theory is. Let's read. B'yois hadavar yadua mafursam, because it is well known. Ki'inyan tfisas achenu mekihila k'dosha Regensburg, that our incarcerated brothers in Regensburg, this story is not a standalone story. This can easily spill over to many places beyond Regensburg and its environs. In fact, that's what the Rabbanim who are today in Nuremberg, and they're gathered there. Why are they gathered there? To save these people who are slated to receive the death penalty for no reason. They're the ones, these rabbis in Nuremberg, are saying, what happens in Regensburg doesn't stay in Regensburg. And it's going to spill over. So therefore the normal rule of you only pay if you're part of the Alila, well here in a certain sense, everyone is part of the Alila, because I'm convinced, their rabbis in Nuremberg are convinced, and I'm endorsing the fact that it is going to spill over. Now, in order for him to do this, he needs to show you Gemaras. He needs to show you in Halacha that we actually say this idea, that even though there is no current libel, but we look into the future and we see it, and so therefore we pretend like it's here now. So in order for him to do this, he turns to the Gemara in Bava Metzia. Now, before we read this Gemara in Bava Metzia, I just want to clarify. He could have just said, wrote his tshuva midin tzedakah. But as I was saying before, tzedakah has a lot of limitations. I don't want to take a moment just to talk about one of the limitations. There is a concept of koifen on tzedakah that you could force a yid to give tzedakah. And when a beis din had police powers, it could theoretically do that. The problem is, when the Gemara talks about forcing for tzedakah, there's a limitation. The limitation is if you can afford it. So in other words, and there's dinner. First you take care of yourself, tzedakah comes after. So if we were going to come to the communities and say, there's a crisis, we need 22,000 florins, so tzedakah. You're using a method that every person then looks at the mirror and says, well, I have these expenses, I'm not chayiv in tzedakah. Or I have local, then you get into the problem, I have here my local things. So working with tzedakah or a regular pidyon shvuyim model is not going to be very, very helpful. It's not going to be very attractive. It's not going to get you the money that you're looking for. What's going to get you the money you're looking for is if you turn it into a chayiv. Because as we're going to say later, a chayiv, you got start selling off your property. If it's a chayiv, if you have a real debt, so then you got to pay up. There's no excuses. And here you're able to go much deeper into people's pockets if it's understood as a chayiv. And Maharik wants to do that. He wants to say that it's a chayiv. And how is it a chayiv? Because everyone is part of the libel. Where do you see that in the Gemara, even though right now? Why is everyone part of the libel? Because what happens here is going to spill over. Who tells us we have a right to speak that way? Here's a Gemara in Bava Metzia, Daf Kuf Ches Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Yehuda says as follows: Lekarya denara, Nahara is a river. Karya denara, digging in a river. So when are we digging in a river? So Rashi explains, you have a river, and then let's say there's a flood or whatever, it brings water deposits from other places. Along with the water comes a lot of schmutz and a lot of sand and a lot of mud and a lot of rocks. And suddenly what happens is now the river isn't flowing the way it needs to. So the people downstream aren't able to get their water. So tatoi, the people living further down, misaye iloi, they need to help the people higher up on this river. Why? So Rashi explains what's happening is very simple. If you live further down, let's say the blockage is at point 1 in the river, okay, and you live at point 3. When the river is blocked at point 1, it impacts you at point 3. And so therefore, if you're living at point 3, you have no choice. So who's doing the work? Obviously, the people at 1 are doing it. They see the problem. They see the rocks. They're the one hiring the construction crew because it's happening in their backyard. Yeah, but they're going to come to you and they're going to say, you need to pay. Because essentially your partner is in this river and it's going to affect you just like it's affecting them. So you need to pay for the damage. This is how Rashi explains that. However, the people higher up in the river don't need to pay lower down in the river. So let's now talk about this rock buildup happening at point 3 in the river. So who is it impacting? It's impacting the people in point 3. Now all of a sudden they're not able to get water into their streams, into their fields, into whatever they need. But the people at point 1, they're completely not impacted by this. Baruch Hashem, the river is working just good. So they don't need that construction project that's happening at 3. So they don't need it. So they don't need it's not their expense. They don't need to deal with it. It's a problem for point number 3. Continues the Gemara. V'chilufa b'maya demitra. Just the opposite when it comes to rainwater. What does it mean when it comes to rainwater? So Rashi explains here we're talking about a drainage problem. So what's a drainage problem? The drainage problem goes as follows. So let's say you have a place and the water comes, Rashi says, and now we have mud, and it ruins the roads, and all these things. So we build a channel to take this water down, and it's obviously sloping downward, to get it out of the city. So now what happens, says Rashi, if this channel is stuffed toward the bottom of the channel? So who is this impacting when it's stuffed at the bottom of the channel? It's impacting everyone. The people at the bottom, it's obviously impacting them. Now it's going to start flooding by them, and you're going to have mud and guk and all that. But slowly, the buildup is going to go up the channel, and eventually it's going to reach the people at the top. So so here the problem happened at point 3. but it impacts not only the people at 3, the people at 1 as well when it's a drainage problem. And so therefore everyone needs to pay to get a construction crew in there to fix the problem so that the water could drain out properly. However, what if the drainage problem is at point 1, higher up on the hill? So now the people at point 3, lower down the hill, are like, I don't care. So it's blocked, so the water's not draining, so it's staying up there. So it's not coming down to us. So it's their problem. So the people at point 1, they are the ones who need to fix the drainage problem. The people at point 3, they don't need to because it doesn't bother them. In fact, they don't care as long as there's no flood that's going on by them. So that's what's pshat in the Gemara, chilufa b'maya demitra, that when it's a drainage problem, it's just the opposite. So now what Marik does is he zeroes in on this Gemara on the drainage issue. And specifically, when you have a drainage problem downhill, which what we're calling point 3, when you have a drainage problem over there, what did we say? The people higher up at point 1, they need to be mishtatef and they need to pay for this drainage problem. Says Marik as follows. When the blockage starts at point 3, lower down, there is no immediate problem yet up at the top. It takes a long time to have a sewage buildup for it to climb all the way up. Nonetheless, the people lower down, the people higher up, are obligated to pay lower down, even though, again, it's going to take a long time. I don't know if it's days, if it's weeks, or if it's months, maybe even years in some cases. But it's going to take time for the build-up to impact the people higher up. Nonetheless, because it's eventually going to happen, because it's eventually going to hit them, so I don't care about timetables. I don't care about what's in the future and what's now. And so therefore the people up on top have to help out. So what does Marik do? Marik says, I found my Gemara. I found what I was looking for. Because what I was looking for is a case where there are people say, I'm not damaged. I'm good. We're fine. We're not Regensburg. We live elsewhere. Yeah. But there's a sewage, there's a drainage crisis, and right now it's in Regensburg, and it's slowly going to build up. And what do we see from this Gemara over here? That because we know it's slowly going to build up, so all the other cities and all the other towns, knowing that it's going to come to them, they're obligated to pay. In his words, Hachanami loishna. Our case here in Regensburg, no difference. Although it is true that the harm is coming first to Regensburg, it is known it is worth knowing that the other places are also going to fall into this trap, and so they need to pay. Now right away he says, 1 second, but someone's going to object to this. How someone going to object? Don't say, 1 second, how can you compare? When it comes to drainage, you know for sure that if there's a problem in 3, it's for sure going to hit higher up on the hill. It's just a question of time. But here in Germany, you really know that for sure what happens in Regensburg is going to hit the other towns and cities. It's a matter of doubt. People will say, perhaps, maybe other places aren't going to get the blood libel. Maybe that only happened over here. Don't say that. Why shouldn't you say that? Says Maharik, we see, unfortunately, the way I understand Maharik, what he's saying over here is, it's not a random event. This is a premeditated conspiracy, and there's a larger picture over here, and there is a plan to undermine the stability of Jewry within the Holy Roman Empire, and therefore, Kol Kahai Gavna in this situation, Hashem Barev Rachma V'Tzaleinu Miyadam, may Hashem save us, and therefore, Kol Kahai Gavna in this type of situation, Bari Hadzeka Nami. I count this as Bari Hadzeka. Valzeh Namar, the pasuk in Mishlei says, Ashrei Adam Mefachet Tamid, which is a very interesting pasuk. Praise is the person who's constantly anxious. Really, anxiety, today's Tanya, is a negative thing. We don't want people to have negative emotions. So the Gemara explains, the Gemara brings us in Gittin, the Sugya of the Churban, Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis. It says over there, it introduces this before it says the story Kamsa Bar Kamsa and other stories over there. And it's saying that these are stories when people made historic mistakes, where they failed to see the consequences of their actions. Asher Adam Mafachid Tamid is that a person is praised when they have foresight and they see the danger ahead and they act accordingly. In other words, when it helps you behave cautiously, then it's a good thing, it's a positive thing. And that's what the Gemara that's how the Gemara is using it in Gittin und Hey, and that's how the Marik is using it over here. Now, in order to truly understand and appreciate what Marik is saying over here, where he's talking about this broader conspiracy, as of now, so far, we only discussed 2 blood libels. We discussed Trent in 1475 and Regensburg the next year. But the truth is, if we go back to this book, The Myth of Ritual Murder, we look at page number 2. Here's this another timeline. You'll see there was a lot going on during this decade in the Germanic lands as it relates to the blood libel. In Endingen, 1470, there was a blood libel, 3 Jews were executed, and all Jewish families were expelled. By the way, in all these cases, horrific torture as well, and the manner of execution, it's unbearable even reading about it, but I'm not going to summarize that. Pforzheim, 1470, a blood libel, 4 Jews executed. Frankfurt, 1470, a blood libel. The Jews offered money to the emperor, who intervened and saved them. Regensburg, 1474, same city, 2 years earlier. There is a blood libel, and this one involves a very famous Gadol B'Yisrael, Mahari Brunner, Rabbi Yisrael of Brunna. He was actually arrested, but the emperor intervened and ordered his release. Regensburg, 1475, something else called host desecration. In short, this is an accusation that Jews would go to churches and take the bread that is used in Catholic rite, which, in their belief, represents their founder, and that Jews, in order to redo the crucifixion, would abuse this piece of bread. Now, for Catholics, this is a terrible, it's profaning something that they regard as holy. And they would say that Jews would do this. They had this taiva to break into churches and to steal this bread and to do this. So it's called host desecration. And this happened in 1475. No arrests apparently were made. Trent, 1475, we already spoke about that blood libel. Regensburg, 1476, we already spoke about that blood libel. Passau, 1478, a allegation of host desecration. The two are related. Blood libel and host desecration, there are certain similarities between the two. 6 men are killed. A number were forced to convert. The rest were expelled. Nuremberg, 1478, the place where this convention occurred, there was a host desecration. No arrests were made. March 12th, 1478, the Jews in Salzburg were fearing there's going to be charges of ritual murder because there's so much going around. And so they intervened with Frederick. Frederick writes to the Archbishop of Salzburg, warning him against getting involved in such proceedings. The bottom line is, there was a lot going on during these years. So when the rabbis in Nuremberg say, what happens in Regensburg is not ending in Regensburg, there's a historical context for that. And that's what Marik is endorsing here. Marik is obviously aware of all of these, or at least most of these blood libels. The author of this book, Rani Pochia Sia, he says as follows: the trial of 1467 in Regensburg represented a watershed. Imperial opposition discredited the ritual murder and host desecration trials in Regensburg. So what he's saying over here is the fact that the emperor was getting involved and saying no, this was actually having an effect. After 1480, another ritual murder trial would have lost credibility from the start. And that's because ultimately a settlement was reached. After 1480, this specific language proved inadequate. He goes on to say that all of a sudden we see a shift. Anti-Semites stopped talking about host desecration and blood libels. Instead, they started talking about how Jews are a not positive force in the economy in terms of money lending and in terms of the things that they sell and things like that. And in fact, during the rest of the reign of Frederick the Emperor Frederick, there was no more blood libels after 1480 for a span of more than 20 years. So you actually see that what Marik was saying was, let's get these guys out, and then it's like publicized that the emperor is against this, and then people look around and say, it didn't work in Regensburg, it's not going to work in Regensburg, and everyone was aware. There was the politics and the difficulty the city had to go through, and they're going to just say, forget it, it's not worth it. and it's going to stop. So this is what he means when he's like, I don't consider this a suffix. I consider this a vadai. He used the language of bari ezeka. Now, a person could still say, okay, tell me probable, tell me very probable, but you can literally use the language bari ezeka. Aren't you a little bit going a little too far? It's mamish comparable to the case of the drainage system, where there it's 100% that's going to happen. So that's a very, very fair question that one could ask on Marik. Marik wasn't bothered by this so much, but others asked this. So we're going to turn now to Rabbi Yosef Ibn Ezra. Rabbi Yosef Ibn Ezra is the author of a Sefer Masa Melech. He lived in the 1500s. He lived a little after Maharik. Sefer Masa Melech is a very interesting sefer. It's all about taxes. Very beautiful sefer, very organized in the way he writes. He lived in the Ottoman Empire, and he's more famous for his sefer Atzmais Yosef, which is a commentary to Maseches Kedushin that's widely studied. So he summarizes this tshuva of Maharik, and he says, if you read Maharik well, Huzal, you'll be able to see that Maharik himself, Hirgish Cholsha Berayosai, realized the weakness of his raya. Deshani Hasam, because the case of the pipe is different, because future damage to the people living higher up is for sure going to happen. But in places where it isn't certain, it's just a possibility. Who's going to say that they're obligated to pay? This is an objection that he introduces. And even with all the historical context that we spoke about, which I'm not sure how much of it Masa Melech was taking into consideration, but even with all of that, still his point stands, like you don't have the level of definite. He goes on and points out something else. He says, this drainage pipe, who built it lechatchila? Both the people higher up and lower up, they're partners in it. So if you both put it there lechatchila, so obviously you're both responsible for the maintenance. But that doesn't carry over to two German kehillas. What is our connection? We didn't do anything together. We didn't build some sort of pipe together. And so that's another objection that Rabbi Yosef Ibn Ezra brings in his Sefer Masa Melech. Now recognizing, he says that Maharik knows that. Why does he say that? Because Maharik goes on in his tshuva and says, and what if you don't buy this argument? What if you're going to say, come on, it's not certain. And you don't buy the argument that it's comparable to this Gemara. What then? Says Maharik, I'm still going to be mechayev all the German cities to participate. Why? I'll bring another svara. He brings a Mishnah in Mesachas Baba Basra. Zok the Mishnah in Parak Aleph of Baba Basra, Koifin Oisoi, when there's a member of a chutzner, of a courtyard, and there's multiple people who's sharing the space, so each person is forced to contribute to build a base shar, a guardhouse, fidelis, lachatzar, and a door for security. So in other words, all members of this condominium are obligated to contribute toward its security. Then it says the same thing for a city. We force all people in a city, live nicely, to build a chayma, a wall, lasayim, doors, ubriach, and bolts. Okay, now we expand to Tosefta Mesechus Baba Metzia, where it's even going to get us a bigger chiddush. And that is, this is going to apply even if you don't live in the city. This is important, because remember, Maharik wants to say that you're obligated to pay what goes on in Regensburg, even though you don't live in Regensburg, right? So the Tosefta gets him close. What does it say over there? Let's say I own a home in another chatzar where I don't live. So bnei chatzar acheres, the people of that other chatzar, mishavdenoise, they can force me to pay lasesimoem, that I should pay for a delis, a door, nagar, a bolt, a minol, and a lock lechatzar. So even though I don't live there, I only have property there, nonetheless, the people over there are able to force me to contribute to pay for the security. Says Maharik, I'm going to use this law as a precedent to say that all the kehillas in Germany are obligated to pay for Regensburg. What do we see? Anytime we have a fear of theft, so what's the logic here? Anyone who is risked by theft has to pay to protect against it. That's why the people of the chutzner, whether they live there or not, are obligated to pay for the security of the chutzner. How much more so in this great concern? Shichas v'shalom chashash hagufa nefesh. It's interesting, he waits till this point in the tshuva to say that, by the way, there's not only a physical threat here, there's also a spiritual. What's a spiritual threat here? Uchedamrinan omale nagdu. That if they would have beaten Hananya, Mishal, Va'azariah, instead of just saying you're going to die for failing to serve idols, that you're going to be beaten and tortured, the Gemara says they would have done it. What's he alluding to here? He's alluding to the fact that in many of these cases, in these libels, besides for all the physical harm that comes to Jewish people in terms of murder, in terms of torture, in terms of expulsion, there's also the fact that some convert. And that's why, because of the torture. And the limud chus is, look at the Gemara, Hananya, Mishal, Va'azariah are said that they would, there's a lot of discussion about it, but kipshutoy, that's what the Gemara is saying, that they themselves would have given in to the torture. And that's part of the threat, and it's a huge threat, both begashmius and beruchnius. And so therefore, just like everyone needs to pay to secure their property in the Chatzar, so all of German Jewry needs to pay to secure this reality of the blood libel. That's his argument over here. And he goes on to say, Va'afilu miglima da'al kasfayu, even from the cloak that's on their shoulders. Here, this is the words I was using before. In other words, it's a chayv. This is not tzedakah. You come with tzedakah, you're going to get a few cents. Because there's 100 ways out of tzedakah. I don't have enough money, or etc. I have my own. But now, if it's a real chayv, so the lashon of the Gemara in Mesechus Baba says, a chayv, you got to do anything to pay. There's no bankruptcy in halacha. You got to pay up. Even meglimad al kasfayu, even take your cloak off and sell it, and with that money pay back your debt. So in other words, I'm going to be going to all the Jews and say, you have things, you're going to have to sell it in order to help the Jews in Regensburg. Now there's a halachic discussion whether Glima dal kasvayu is literally, if someone's in Baal Chayv, he literally has to give away the cloth. We don't need to get into that. The bottom line is, everyone understands it's going to dig very deep into people's assets over here and make difficult sacrifices people are going to have to make once we realize that is a real debt. Why is it a real debt in his second model? It's a real debt because he's comparing it to, you have stakes in the Chatzar, you need to pay for the lock. You have stakes in the blood libel in Germany, so you need to pay to make it go away. That's the way he's framing it. And this is his second argument on top of his earlier one. His earlier one wants to say, what do you mean? You're like the people at the top of the pipe, the top drainage pipe. But if you don't want to accept that, and if you don't want to say, well, it's not for sure. This is not for sure. The case of a chatzar, when you're forcing people to put up a security system, you know for sure a ganav is going to come. You don't know for sure. But why are you doing it? Because even if it's not for sure, if you have a stake in it, you need to pay for that suffix. And so therefore, all of Ashkenaz Jewry is like property owners in this chatzar, he says, and so they need to go ahead and they need to pay despite the doubt for this. This is his second argument. Now this too, the Mas HaMelech wasn't too thrilled with this argument. And very simply, he said, how could you compare? There, you own property in the chatzar. You have a house in the chatzar. You have an asset right there. So you have an asset right there. You need to protect that asset. All people do. So all people need a partner. Here, you don't live in Regensburg. You live somewhere else. It's another city. So how do you bring evidence from that, which talks about people who have specific assets in a chatzar, to people who live entirely in a different city? So he's not, there's some logic here, he grants, but he doesn't find that this is a persuasive precedent from the Gemara. And let's read the second paragraph of number 12, where Rabbi Yosef ibn Ezra, the Mas HaMelech, says, Ba'ofen, therefore, because of my objections, I actually would say those who live elsewhere do not have to pay. In halacha, you can't take money from someone if you don't have very, very strong evidence. And we don't have here strong evidence, because the two arguments that Ma'arik brought, I don't buy it. Ma'arik brought a third argument, which I'm excluding from the shir, and that also the Mas HaMelech wasn't too thrilled with. V'tamahati min Arav Agadol. I'm actually surprised by Ma'arik. Ma'arik is such a well-known Pesach, such a well-known figure. He's quoted by everyone. I'm surprised. Eich chayavam. How did he obligate them? V'hechrim. And he, in fact, excommunicated them. V'higzim kolkach. He exaggerated. Al dvar zeh on this. In Lo Shenemar, maybe the limud chus is, he says, Anshe Regensburg, Hoyoanim, the people in Regensburg couldn't afford it. Okay, that we know for sure. The people in Regensburg couldn't afford it. They couldn't handle this burden. And therefore negative stuff is going to happen to them if they can't pay. Yes, this was actually, I'm not sure why he's saying Efsher. We know for a fact that was the case. But then look, so he says, so because of that, the love that Ma'arik has for the Jews, or his compassion is probably the better word here. His compassion that Ma'arik has for the Regensburg Jews makes him distort, essentially, what the halacha is supposed to be. There's the normal way of doing things. But when someone has a deep emotional connection, what does it do? It makes us divert from the norm. So he's saying that the love and compassion that Ma'arik had for this Jewish community made him go away from Shura Sadin. This is a really interesting line, an interesting accusation. How often is it that a rabbi will say, academically you're wrong, but it was your emotional biases that got in the way? This is a very, very interesting statement that Rabbi Yosef ibn Ezra, the Masa Melech, is saying. Ma'arik is so famous that he wasn't the only one. Masa Melech isn't the only one. Many, many poskim throughout the generations, the centuries that followed, discussed this Ma'arik. Some supporting it, some raising objections to it. One of the great voices of support is none other than the Rama. The Rama in Shulchan Aruch and Choshen Mishpat brings a Ma'arik and says Allah halacha. But there's a vast discussion by many of the poskim around this Ma'arik. I want to do one case, one sample of someone who cited the Ma'arik in a later generation. Shal Sechul is Maharam Lublin, Simin Mem. Maharam Lublin lived in the second half of the 16th century, late 1500s, early 1600s. He's known as the author of Maharam. When you learn Gemara, you learn the Maharsha, you learn the Maharam. So that Maharam is actually his name. The name of the Sefer is Meir Einei Chachamim, and it's printed in the back of the Gemaras. He lived in different cities in Poland, in Krakow, in Lvov, and in Lublin. And he deals with the following case. The Yatsa Gzeiras HaKeser. There was a Gzeira of the Keser. The Keser during these years in the late 1500s is Rudolf II. Shakal HaYehudim HaYoshim B'chol Medinas Shlesia. So this is Silesia. Silesia is a region, most of Silesia today is in Poland. Okay, so then there's the province of Silesia. And basically Rudolf says, Kulam Gareshu Gurushu. All Jews out of Silesia. The expulsion of the Jews in Silesia happened in the year 1582. Vayisharu ach yoshvei kilas kodesh Tzilz. There's the city. The German name of it is Tzilz. In Polish, it's Biala. In Polish, it's Biala. Not the Biala famous for the Biala Chassidim. It's a different place. And they weren't expelled. Why? Beroiv hishtadlusam v'hotzayasam harbe asher paisu ha'oivim baratzei kasef. They basically paid major monies to the enemies, and Tzilz isn't expelled. He goes on to say that this dragged on for a while, but it's like temporary, because Tzilz isn't told they could stay. It's just the expulsion is delayed, and it's delayed, and it's delayed, and it's delayed. Then what happens is that the Jewish leaders in Prague is the capital where Rudolf is living. So the leaders over there, the Jewish communal leaders, I believe Harao of Prague, by the way, was alive at this time. They go to Rudolf and they basically get Bittul Hagzera for Tzilz. So now the Jews of this place called Tzilz, they don't need it. It's the only place left in Silesia that's not having an expulsion. Okay, but in order to get this done, they needed to give 2,000 gold coins. 2,000 gold coins. So now, how are we going to get these 2,000 gold coins? The community in Tzilz can't afford this, so what happens is as follows. An arrangement is made. You have the Polish jury is divided then in three different medinas, three different provinces. So collectively they say, you know something? We're going to give a fifth of the total amount, which is 400 golden coins. We're going to give to the community at Tzilz to help them out. Then you have Medinos Pehem. Pehem is the Jewish way of saying Bohemia. Bohemia is Prague is in Bohemia. That was the capital. They say they're also going to give 400 gold coins. And then the province of Moravia, the Jewish community of Moravia, they say they're also going to give 400 gold coins. So now we have a total of 1,200. We're missing 800 gold coins. So what happens is that, again, it's not entirely clear who's making the rules over here. They say, Tzilz, you guys, together with a neighboring place called Hatziplatz. Hatziplatz is 17 kilometers away from Tzilz, and it's part of Silesia. But Jews there weren't part of the ban. Why? Apparently because it's under the jurisdiction of a bishop. And he had his own thing, and the emperor therefore can't expel the Jews from this place called Hatziplatz. Today it's in the Czech Republic. It's known as Osoblaha. That's the modern name today. So they say, you in Hatziplatz, together with Tziltz, you're going to come in for the last 800. So Tziltz says, all right, that's great, no problem. Hatziplatz says, excuse me, why do we need to pay? We're not part of this thing. We live under this bishop who never said we're expelled. We don't have to pay. Why are you saying that we need to pay? So this turns into a dispute. Representatives of both communities of Tziltz and Hatziplatz come to Maram Lublin. I don't know where he is in the year 1582. Which probably is not too difficult to figure out, whether he's in Krakow, whether he's in Lvov, whether in Lublin. And it's a din Torah, essentially. Does Hatziplatz need to pay or not? What's Maram Lublin going to do? What's he going to answer? So again, if you follow what I call the traditional model, they're not part of the Gzeira. They're not part of the Gzeira, you can't be Mechayev them. But if you follow that logic, by the way, none of these other Kehilas needed to pay. Okay, they'll say they volunteered. Moravia volunteered, Bohemia volunteered, the three Medinas in Poland volunteered. That's very, very nice then. But if you follow the traditional model, we're not part of the Gzeira, we don't need to pay. Says Maram Lublin, no. You're in Silesia. You're in the same province. You're 17 kilometers away from Tziltz. I know there's a bishop over there. He says, look at the Tshuva the Marik. The Tshuva Marik tells you that if there's good reason to believe it's going to land on you, so then we count that you are part of the Hezek now, and so you need to pay now. And Maram Lublin, based his psak on this, and he says they need to pay. How much? They need to give half what everyone else gave. Everyone else gave 400 gold coins, so they need to give 200 gold coins. This is the psak that Maram Lublin gave. And he signs off, Na'um Meir Atzar, this is how he signs off this particular psak din. So you see, this is an example of a posek in a later generation who used Marik's model, despite the objections that we spoke about before. And as I said a moment ago, large discussion in subsequent generations amongst Rabbanim and Poskim about this ruling of the Marik. The bottom line is that in the case of the Marik, once it was clear where this money is coming from, apparently the Kehillah stepped up. And now it was clear, so a payment plan was made, and in 1480, September 4th, 1480, the rest of the Jews 17 Jews that were incarcerated were released from Regensburg. Ultimately, as I mentioned before, that this ended the blood libel for a good 20 or so years. It did eventually come back, as we know from history often happens. Another sad note is in the 16th century, the Jews were expelled from Regensburg. But that was to happen a number of decades after this whole story. So, as a conclusion, there's a pasuk in Yecheskel, Perek Lamed Vav, pasuk Yud Gimel, that has a nevuah that says as follows: Koyamar Hashem Alekim, so says God, Yan Oimrim Lachem, they say to you, Oicheles Adam At, you consume people, Umishakeles Goyayich Hoyisa. And again, you destroy and you eradicate nations. So the prophecy is that I'm saying that you will no longer consume the human. And you'll stop eradicating nations. What is this pasuk? What is this nevuah? So the pshuta shomikra of this, if you look in Rashi and the other basic mefarshim, is that the Navi here is talking to Eretz Yisrael. And he's saying, Eretz Yisrael, you have a terrible reputation. Why? Because look, there were 7 nations that lived there. They were tossed from the land. The Jewish people lived there. They were tossed from the land. You're a land that eats people. You consume people. It's not a stable place to live. Israel's not a stable place. That's what people are saying. You're causing trouble for many nations. So the nevuah is there's going to come a day, Israel is going to be a place of security. No one's going to ever say, ever again, that the land of Israel is unsafe. No one's ever going to say that you consume people. That's the pshuta shomikra of this beautiful nevuah, Yecheskel Lamed Vav. Says Abarbanel, I have another pshat. My pshat is that we're not talking to Eretz Yisrael, we're talking to the Jewish people. And what happens is, he says that we're coming and we're saying to the Jewish people, Oimrim lachem, the nations of the world say to you, Jewish people, Oicheles adamat, you consume humans. You're destroying nations for this ritual purpose. In the words of Abarbanel, lirmois. There's a remez here, al hara agdoila, the terrible travesty, asher metzanu bein bnei Edom, begalus hazeh, that happened amongst Christians, because in the Islamic lands, this was an unknown accusation until into the 19th century. I shouldn't say that because we saw actually a case earlier from the 1600s. Okay, but by Abarbanel's time, it's unheard of in Islamic lands. It's a problem in Edom. Shemaitzian diba b'nei Yisrael, they libel the Jews, shahargim es hagoyim, that they kill Gentiles b'seiser secretly, kedei lechom midama b'chag Pesach, to consume their blood on Pesach. V'hoya hashekar v'akazav hazeh, and this lie is siba l'shmadois v'harigois hatzumos, terrible suffering and persecutions against the Jewish people. So alkein iftiach hanavi, so the Navi is saying shaloi si alehem aklim azosoid, it's not going to happen. Adam lo seich liyoid, no one's going to ever dream to say this ever again. Goyayich lo shak liyoid, no one's going to dream to say that Jews engage in this terrible act. That's the nevuah. Abarbanel lived during the decade that we were talking about, the 1470s. He lived between 1437 and 1508. He lived at the time in Spain and Portugal, probably Portugal. He was very familiar with these events, and that spills over into his very novel commentary on this pasuk of Yecheskel. So, as much as the blood libel has been with us till in certain ways till today, though it has taken on new meanings and new definitions, Abarbanel tells us we can and must hope and aspire for the day that this baseless claim and all baseless claims will be eradicated forever.